Welcome to Attic Raiders Retro Reviews, where today I'm going to be building some six-legged hexapod robots out of everyday junk. Now these robots could obviously be used for any sci-fi style wargame, but for me specifically I'm thinking about the new Stargrave Death Vector, because in the brand new bestiary there's a new opponent called an Automite, which I don't really know anything about, but according to the review of Death Vector in the April edition of Wargames Illustrated, it's a small head-sized six-legged robot. And being used for Stargrave, it's more than likely that there's going to have to be a lot of them made to be used. So I want something that's cheap to make, quick, easy, and out of materials that I can get lots of really easily. So the bulk of this build is going to be made using a Robinson's fruit shoot bottle, or rather the piece off the very top. Now unfortunately there is a slight problem with this. Last year in 2004 the EU directive was enacted, which meant that all plastic bottles now have to be produced by the manufacturers with a tether going from the cap to the rest of the bottle, because that way it means that the bottle caps are not going to come loose and they're not going to contribute to marine or ocean pollution. That does mean that as of 2004 all Robinson fruit shoots have changed over to a brand new design of bottle cap, and that's completely useless for what I'm going to be building today. There is still this older style packaging around on supermarket shelves, but it is definitely dying out and it's becoming quite difficult to find. So if you want to make some of these and you're in the EU or the UK, then I would definitely try to stock up on them now. So the main thing I'm going to do is just get rid of the bulk of this cap, because I only really want this very top piece, which is incredibly detailed. I don't know why they put so much detail into it, but it's a really nicely sculpted piece. I'm using a sharp hobby knife to slice carefully along the edge of these ridges through the first concentric circle and stopping at the second one. I'm then going to count along, miss out two of those ridges, and then slice along the edge of the third ridge, again stopping where I did before. I want to get rid of the section between those two cuts, so I'm going to do a diagonal slice in, stopping where that first cut and second cut had finished, so that I can get rid of two small triangles of plastic. And once that's done, I've then got space to be able to get my blade in there and be able to cut down that plastic down to the inner concentric circle, and just using the tip of my blade in order to tidy that up and make it look nice. I'm then going to do the same again on the opposite side, so counting across three ridges, which are going to be my legs, I then cut in again to the inner concentric circle. Then on the opposite side, count in three more ridges, which again are going to be three more legs, and cut in another slice along the ridge edge, stopping in the same place. Then, just as before, more diagonal slices, allowing me to cut out some little triangles of plastic, and that gives me space in order to get my blade in so that I can work it around the sides of that concentric circle in the middle and start shaping this into a robot with legs. And you can start to see the overall shape here with three legs on each side, but there's a lot of extra plastic that still needs removed between the legs. Again, slicing in carefully with that hobby knife and not stopping until you get to the inner concentric circle, and then slicing out carefully some more little triangles for the knife to go in and clean this up between these individual legs. Now, needle files might be a good call at this point, but I simply couldn't find mine, so I used my knife for everything. I'm also not entirely sure that this kind of plastic will actually sand that well. We've still got a big chunk of plastic underneath the body, which I don't want, so again, more careful cutting with the hobby knife. I did actually find as I went on with these that using sprue cutters in order to get rid of the bulk of this piece of plastic actually works much better and is faster and safer. I want to shape those legs more, so using the little ridge that runs down the center of each of those legs, I'm cutting diagonally either side of that with my sprue cutters. I can then use my hobby knife again to do a couple more little slices to round off those hard corners and make those legs look much nicer. This kind of plastic doesn't take glue very well, so I'm going to scratch it up a bit in order to give the glue something to grip onto. I want to bulk up the body of this little robot, and for this I'm going to use these plastic half perils, and I've got all different sizes here which I got, I think, from the range here in the UK, and I'm just selecting one that looks about right for this size of body. And as I did with the body, I'm just scraping it up a bit to give the glue something to grip onto. And then it's just a matter of putting a bit of super glue onto the body and then placing that half peril exactly where you want it, trying to make sure that you've got an even amount of space all the way around it. I want this robot to just have a single eye on here. I'm using these peril alphabet stickers, which I use a lot. There's about 3 different sizes of half spheres on this sheet, and as you can see, there's a lot that you get for your money. With a little dab of super glue, that eye will go on really easily, and you can position it to look either straight ahead or slightly to the side in order to give it a bit more movement. And with just those 3 materials, the build is finished. I use really cheap grey primer from Poundland, which is only about £4 a can, in order to get good paint adhesion. And then for this robot, I wanted to have quite a militaristic look, so I'm going for a green colour scheme here. And as you can see, this is really not a fancy brush that I'm using. It's slightly splayed, but it doesn't matter for this kind of paintwork just now. I don't want just a single green colour on here because it's going to look too flat, so I'm using a darker green wash and applying this all over everything. This will give more variation and interest to the colour, but more importantly, it's going to seep into all those crevices and recessed areas and make them really stand out. To help with that contrast, I'm then going to dry brush that original green colour back over the top of everything and pick up the highlights, and then dry brush on a brighter, more yellowy green in order to really punch up that colour a bit more and make it look a bit more saturated. I really like that the original bottle cap had that raised concentric circle because it really adds a nice piece of detail. In the middle of each leg, if it's painted silver like this, then it looks like a hinge where the leg would bend. So I just want to bring some more attention to that with another colour. I like robots to have evil glowing red eyes, and it's a really nice contrast to this green colour. It shows up really well on the tabletop. So I'm using quite a dark red for the base here, and then applying a lighter, brighter red over the top of that, not going all the way to the edges. And then because I want this to be a reflective glass lens, I'm going to put a tiny little bit of white on here as a light reflection. I really want to up the contrast on this and start making it look more worn. So I'm using a black wash and carefully painting it into the deepest crevices, particularly around the body here, around the eye lens, and over the top of and around those leg hinges. I really find that this makes it pop. This, of course, is an old scavenger droid that's been around for a long time and has not been looked after properly, so it's got a lot of wear and tear on it. So to show that, I'm using a darker grey colour, a fine pointed brush, and I'm painting on lots of different scratches and dents and chips on raised areas where it's likely to come in contact with other things. I then like to take a much lighter grey colour and a finer brush and paint some additional scratches on top of those grey scratches. This makes it pop even more, and it makes it look like the paintwork has worn through different layers of paint. And that's great, but I want to bring those colours together and make it look a bit more grungy and oily, so I'm using that black wash stippled on. And then as a very final touch, I'm just going to use some satin gloss varnish and apply it to that eye lens so that it's going to pick up the light even more and have more natural white light reflections on there. And with that, I'm calling it done. It's really easy and cheap to make a lot of these, and they look great on the table. Of course, you probably will want some gaming bases on these, which I've added to these ones here. Now, these are not as small as the head-sized Automites which are described in the Death Vector book, but I think I would have been hard-pressed to make something that small with a good level of detail. That said, I think these turned out rather nice, and I will be using these for all kinds of games. Of course, while I was editing this video, Northstar released a picture of the sprue of their upcoming automatons to tie in with Death Vector. You can see that each sprue contains 3 head-sized Automites. They look fantastic, but I'm still pleased with what I've come up with here, especially as it's going to be recycling junk. I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen here today and that it's inspired you to do something like this yourself. If you have, please remember to like, comment and subscribe, and we'll see you next time with more Attic Raiders Retro Reviews.